So here we are again with the Torah. And actually, it's fitting that we have a Torah right here because the public reading of Torah has been a central feature of Jewish worship since there have been Jews. But this ritual has almost always had a fundamental flaw. Namely, that the Torah is written in Hebrew. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. Hebrew is the holy tongue of the Jewish people. Today, it's a modern language spoken by millions. So you're telling me that 2,000 years ago, when they read Torah in synagogue, the congregation had no idea what the Torah reader was chanting? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And we know that this is true because we read about it in the Talmud. The Talmud tells us that in ancient times, when the Torah was read at services, next to the Torah reader would be a curious character called the Meturgaman. And the job of the Meturgaman was to translate the Torah reading into the vernacular, which at the time was Aramaic. Now, eventually, this practice fell out of favor. Obviously, as much fun as it would be, I won't be standing next to Jenna tonight translating along when she chants from the Torah. Sorry about that. I hope you weren't expecting it. Okay, good. But the elimination of this practice was not without its benefits. Most especially because, let's just say, the Torah contains some PG-13 plus content. And indeed, back in the days of the Meturgaman, the rabbis did, in fact, discuss whether there were some passages in the Torah that were best left untranslated in shul. Which is to say that somehow they thought that it would go unnoticed if the Torah reader just went on while the Meturgaman just stood there. One of these potentially problematic passages is found in this week's Torah portion, the story of the golden calf. In the Talmud, the rabbis actually talk about two tellings of this tale. The first is the Torah's third-person narrative. Moses is taking too long receiving the Torah atop Mount Sinai, and the children of Israel start to get nervous. So they gather against Moses' brother Aaron and demand that he make them a god. Fearing for his life, Aaron instructs the assembled mob to bring them all of their gold, and amazingly, they go along with this plan. And Aaron takes all of this gold and molds it into a molten calf, which the people then worship. Now, we recall from the Ten Commandments that idolatry is one of God's big no-nos. And needless to say, God is displeased. But ultimately, thanks to an intercession by Moses, God pardons the children of Israel for this gravest of sins. Hearing this first account of the golden calf, we can imagine why the rabbis were concerned about allowing it to be translated in the public context of synagogue. Let's be real, it wasn't exactly the best look for our ancestors. But ultimately, our sages concluded that this story should indeed be translated, because they hoped that the shame that we felt about our ancestors' iniquities would compel us to pursue atonement ourselves. Ergo, the first telling of the golden calf was fair game for the Meturgaman. But what of the second telling? Well, that comes a few verses later when Moses confronts Aaron about Aaron's role in this sordid affair. And it is Aaron's recapitulation of these events that the Talmud tells us we should not translate in shul. Fortunately, I like to break rules. And this is my renegade Meturgaman moment. Vayomer Aharon, and Aaron said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil. They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us for that fellow Moses. We don't know what happened to him.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' And they gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf. So now that we've heard what we weren't supposed to hear, we're left with a question. What is so offensive about this passage that our sages deemed it necessary to censor it? The medieval commentators have two different takes. Rashi thinks that the rabbis were worried about heresy. He observes that as Aaron tells it, he threw the gold into the fire, and magically, this golden calf just got up and walked out. The problem is the magically got up and walked out part. Idols don't do that. So Rashi argues that the passage was left untranslated lest an undiscerning congregation actually believe Aaron's, shall we say, posterior protecting version of these events. Rashi's students, the Tosafists, suggest that we can do better. They say, how about we give Aaron a break? Everyone knows that Aaron made the golden calf. It's the Torah's worst kept secret because it isn't a secret. One account of this sin is enough. We don't need to. So we don't translate the second in order to protect Aaron's honor. We veil the truth to preserve his dignity. Interestingly, the Tosafist's reasoning is actually in keeping with what we know about Aaron himself. Our tradition teaches that Aaron was a rodef shalom, a pursuer of peace. According to a midrash, whenever two people were in a quarrel, Aaron would go to one of them and say, "Your friend is so upset. He just can't believe this horrible thing that he did to you." Then he would go to the other guy and say, "Your friend is so upset. He just can't believe this horrible thing that he did to you." And what do you know? The next time the two friends saw each other, they kissed and made up. In the pursuit of peace, Aaron dispensed with the ideal of the whole truth. He didn't lie. He just left a few things out. He emphasized a different part of the story. There's another story in the Talmud that questions the ideal of the whole truth. Our sages ask, what does one say about a bride on her wedding day? Shammai says, even if her hair is on fire, we tell it like it is. Hillel says, every bride is beautiful on her wedding day. We don't lie, but our tradition teaches that when it comes to things that matter to us, like peace and love, like honor and dignity, we don't always need to tell the whole truth. There's another set of verses in the Torah that fascinatingly, the Talmud tells us not to translate in shul. These verses were also spoken by Aaron. They are the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. Speak to Aaron and his sons, thus shall you bless the people of Israel. Say to them, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. To this day, we honor Aaron every time we offer this benediction. Yet, like Aaron's retelling of the golden calf, in ancient synagogues, when the Torah reader arrived at these verses, the Maturgaman would remain silent. What do we learn from this silence? We learn that words of blessing transcend the whole truth. We don't lie. We shouldn't lie. But we can offer blessings by omission. When it comes to the pursuit of peace and the preservation of dignity, our tradition teaches that we don't need the whole truth. we can emphasize a different part of the story, or we can let the holy language speak for itself. Shabbat shalom.